Richard, kindly I'd request the other mic because I want at least. Then you give Sarah also.
You want the name of
yeah, the electoral body in
Ethiopia, National Ethiopian Election Board. Ethiopia. Yes.
Okay. And Uganda, Sarah?
It's Uganda Electoral Commission.
Good. So these electoral bodies basically are meant to advocate and implement the legal reforms. And these legal reforms basically are geared towards achieving the gender equality in elections. So they ensure that the election laws are not discriminatory against any particular sect of the society, whether it is women. So they provide for measures like what we call now the gender quotas or reserved seats for women. Then we come to voter registration, which is basically their mandate. So they make efforts to ensure that registration process are accessible. This is where now we have an issue, whether it is accessible. You know, we've been concentrating the last 2 days discussing on accessibilities of voters to the polling station. But there's also the issue of voter registration. I can speak for Kenya. When we did the mass recruitment, it was a sham because people never turned out to register as voters. So there are so many Kenyans out here, in a population of 40 plus million Kenyans. You can see we had a staggering 17, but you can tell there are so many people, even when the exercise was opened, who never came to be registered. So the question again that we should ask ourselves, is it the voter registration process? How should it be conducted? How should the awareness be raised? How should these election bodies conduct it, putting in mind their persons with disability? So normally they set up registration centers, I'm sure you've seen in your countries, that are convenient. And basically in the policies and laws, it should be centers that are accessible. So you can't, for example, tell me I'm a registered voter and I want to register for the first time, and registration only happens in Migingo Island, which is contested at the border of Uganda. So that will not encourage the voter turnout. And voter turnout again is pegged on registration. The more voters who are registered, then the more chances we have of these registered voters coming out to vote on the material day. So again, most women still don't go for the registration, especially the young Turks. Once they finish, I was telling a certain group that politicians forget that every cycle of election will produce first-time voters. So the 2022 or 2021 elections in the other 2 countries paved the way. Any student who was now transitioning to high school will have finished and become 18 by the time when in the next election cycle. So these new voters are always forgotten. We concentrate on Maureen because she has voted since she got to 18, or Sarah, and then we forget those ones who are in school. And I'm happy we said that one of the recommendations is that we introduce these things in school so that as a student leaves high school, they know they have a right and obligation to vote and decide their future. We also spoke about voter education, and the electoral body is supposed to conduct voter education campaigns, and more so for specific groups. They are also meant to address women, marginalized. In Kenya, we call them the SDGs, the special interest groups, which includes persons with disability, women, youth, and also the marginalized. There's been an outcry in the political domain on whether certain areas in this country, especially in Kenya, get that voter education. Does Turkana get the voter education? Or because they're pastoralists, we assume there are no votes there. So these campaigns inform women basically, or the women with disability, about their voting rights. And the importance of this is to tell them their role in elective politics and their participation, how it is important and how it will shape a country. That still is within the mandate of the IEBC as per the IEBC Act. And also when I looked also at the other election bodies in the 2 countries, it's something that they ought to do as per their laws. So the electoral bodies are also meant to encourage political parties to nominate more women as candidates. And that's why you find that most political parties, and this is where now we fail, because the law is there, how the electoral body should run is also in the acts, like Kenya, like I said, the independent, the IEBC Act is there. So they actually overlook. So what happens is you get the lists, when they are clearing political parties, they don't check. Does this political party conform with the 2/3 gender? And I saw it in last election. So when you look at the names published by the political parties, it's not in compliance with the law. So again, we come back to law versus reality. So that has made women not to actively participate. So they are also mandated to work with parties to develop strategies for recruiting and supporting candidates and training programs and mentorships. Political parties, like in Kenya, mostly there are sessions where they collaborate with IEBC, the electoral body. There are seminars in place just to bring awareness and to train specific groups. I know they did like 2 before, I think slightly before elections, I think 8 or 9 months before elections on women. They did 1 for youth, but that's within their mandate, that they actually should work with the parties and do capacity building. So they also have the gender, it cuts across board, gender responsive, too much samosa, gender responsive election administration. So they ensure that their own staff and procedures of gender are also complied with, because in Kenya also we know of Chris Msando and what happened, those situations. There are jobs in Kenya where if you're told, even if the salary is good, you think twice. I think IEBC is one, and the ethics and anti-corruption is 2 of the lists of where people hardly show interest, whether they want to take that. So they're supposed to ensure that, and also include, like I said, training the officials on gender issues and providing for female staff at polling stations to make women voters feel more comfortable. Because they are meant to ensure that when you come as a voter and you're a woman, you also feel comfortable. If you're trained by a fellow woman, she will understand better. If your staff also are at the polling stations doing the voter registration, sometimes because of culture again and stereotypes, you find some women are more comfortable, especially in close-knit families or regions. I know of the Muslim community who prefer now to deal with their fellow counterparts who are women. So if you put a woman, it's just like security measures. You don't expect when you're entering this building to have a man search you at the security desk. I mean, it's improper, it's unethical. So IEBC also and the electoral bodies across the 3 countries are mandated to ensure that they have staff who are women, who are also aware and can also be able to train and also make the women feel comfortable in the election day. So they should also take steps to ensure safety and security of women. And we talk about from candidates and voters, especially in regions with security concerns, where women are attacked. So it is actually the mandate of the electoral bodies to ensure that violence during election, from the period of campaign to the end at the polling stations, to the time the results are announced, that measures are taken in place in terms of security. So this, as I said, may involve working with law enforcement agencies, which they are allowed to, as per the laws, to ensure that protection. What happens to a woman who is a voter, who comes to a polling station and is abused? In the polling station, it has happened. The IEBC officials from the presiding officer are entitled to use security agencies to handle that situation, which is a malpractice. So they still have that in their ambit. The other mandate that these election bodies have is, of course, the data collection and analysis. So they collect and analyze, and sometimes this is good because we are able to find the statistics on how we are performing as a country. From Uganda, when I read the report from the electoral body in Uganda, it was showing the tabulation. And that's how some of us who are outsiders could tell that we have more women registered in Uganda as compared to the male counterparts. So that is within their mandate that they're supposed to analyze. And in this specific day, because we are discussing more about women, they're supposed to analyze gender data that is related to the turnout, the candidate nomination, and election results. That is information most of these election bodies put it in their website. It's unfortunate that it's in their website, but they do nothing to ensure on the ground that is implemented. So they are very good in terms, if you go to any portal from all the 3 countries, you'll find all that data there. But the question is, before you put the data there, did you ensure there was no violence at the polling station and during campaign? How did you protect the women candidates? And how did you ensure political parties did their part in terms of nominations and also party lists? So this data, like I said, helps in monitoring the progress and identifying areas where further efforts are needed. But the question is, do they actually use it to plan for the next cycle? Like for Kenya, I think we've had a challenge. I think Chebukati has really tried to stay for 2 elections. Mostly the entire IEBC plus the chairman go home after every election. So the new team that comes in, by the time they settle, we're already 2 years to election or a year to election. So by the time you settle, you're busy now looking for printing papers and candidates and compliance. So you have no time to look at what happened and do a postmortem on that, which is a very sad state. I would want to hear if Ethiopia and Uganda it's the same, or you people at least have, specific people who stay at least longer to ensure that at least they be able to use the data that they've analyzed. They are also meant to engage with civil society, which is actually something very important. Initially in Kenya it was a bit, IEBC was in its own world, but over the years, courtesy of the law, like I said, they are obligated to sit with civil societies, political parties, and also all actors in electoral processes, just to collaborate with them and hear their thoughts. So I know that they have handled, at least from the Kenyan side, again, they've done that as latest until the last, I think, a week to election, where they engaged presidential candidates and stakeholders on the same. So, sorry about that. So it also is meant, the electoral bodies are meant also to collaborate with women organizations and civil society groups and focus on gender issues. I'll put FIDA on task. I'm sure you're in tandem or in touch with the electoral body, especially during voter data and the political parties. So that's still within their mandate. I'm also keen to hear from Ethiopia if the same happens in terms of partnership. So these partnerships normally help in coordinating efforts to promote women in electoral process. And you might find sometimes it is organizations like this here in this room today that actually give more recommendations or raise issues with the electoral body more than the political parties. Because political parties right now, they're in their own world. It's survival for the fittest. So they only come to the arena a year to election. So they hardly have time to put questions across to the electoral body. Again, they have another mandate, which is monitoring and enforcement. So they should monitor and enforce, like I said, gender equality measures. So the gender quotas, it is the duty of the electoral body to ensure, like in Rwanda, and that's why I said Rwanda is a case, I gave an assignment, you go and read about it. Rwanda is a case that has ensured not only is the law there, but they do enforce. Where Uganda and Kenya and Ethiopia fail is the law is there, but we do not have the enforcement mechanism. So it is the IEBC or the electoral bodies in Ethiopia and Uganda that should ensure that gender quotas are actually reserved and ensure that the political parties are in compliance. So ideally, the law is very clear. If a political party gives me a list and is not in compliance with the law, I'm supposed to reject that list. However, that doesn't happen. It's the same as ethics and anti-corruption. Sometimes you are told, go and get clearance. I mean, they don't even open the file. So you reach there, they just stamp and give you. So the question is, how do they know that I am fit to actually get the good conduct? So again, it comes back to the goodwill, like we said. Again, these electoral bodies have another mandate of research and advocacy. So the commission is entitled in all countries to do research, and research is broad from IT areas to women in electoral participation to policies that need changes and recommendation. And like I said, if you go to the 3 websites from the 3 different countries, you'll find they've done a research document or whatever, but the ground is different. So you'll find all this information, but it's like a flower to show the world we're in compliance. The law says this and we've ticked the boxes, but I don't think, again, it comes down. Again, on accessibility, they are meant to ensure, like I said, that polling stations are accessible to all, including for women with disability, and ensure that there are people there from the independent electoral body or the electoral bodies in Uganda and Ethiopia to ensure that there is someone there to assist voters. Unfortunately, I'm also keen to hear from Uganda and Ethiopia. In Kenya, it's a different case because these people are hardly there. So what happens if a person who is blind or deaf comes to the polling station? They are met not by the IEBC officials because the law is very clear. If I don't know how to read or what, it's either the agent or the presiding officer. So what happens? They're left to the agents. And what happens if I'm fighting with Maureen and I'm a man? I have an agent who's very strong. So he just picks this lady and doesn't care what you say, so they tick. That's how women will lose it again. Promoting inclusivity, that's also their mandate. So they are meant to use inclusive words and materials in their campaigns. And they should also avoid anything that will show they create exclusion. So it is their mandate when they're rolling out a program or doing trainings or doing research, it's actually all inclusive so that no specific quota is left. I guess that's an overview of the electoral bodies in the specific countries, and you can see they have a lot of responsibilities and the buck stops with them in most of these duties and functions. So again, we have a very robust document. We have institutions in place, but whether the institutions have that nationalistic view and the oath of office they took is to protect the voters and the integrity of the election is a question that I will throw to the plenary discussion. But an overview, they have all this mandate with them. So the question is, do you think the electoral bodies in your countries are performing, or do you think they're also cause of what we are going through in terms of gender and the key thing we talked about, fair elections? So now I open for any questions, then we can discuss plenary. And now it's open to this and what we discussed in the morning. But before I even go to plenary, I want to ask Uganda and Ethiopia to share perhaps how the electoral bodies work, because maybe it's a bit different. Like I said, in our country, after every election cycle, you chase them. Then again, the politicians decide who will sit. Then after that election, again, we chase them. By the time we get, like right now, we don't have an electoral body. The politicians are still doing the picky-ponky. Then when they finish, you'll find it's not even this year, it's not next year. Maybe it will be the year. By the time they are sworn in parliament, you know the process is long. So by the time they are sworn in, they have 1 year to deliver the election, which again is too short because there's a lot of work to be done. So I can start with Uganda.
So I like the power of the citizens in Kenya. In Uganda, it's different because, as I told you, the president is the appointing authority for all electoral commissioners, really. And so they are there as long as they want to continue to make sure that the junta is sustained. So they don't even have time to do the post-mortem because there is nothing to do. It's just that now, rather than talking on the sidelines, we are now engaging them. We have another project called Strengthening Citizen Engagement in Elections. And now we participate, we reach out to the Electoral Commission. We also, so voter education, not anyone can stand up and do voter education in Uganda. You need to be accredited by the Electoral Commission. And that's also one way of shrinking civic space and ensuring that, you know, if you're going to massively conscientize the citizens, then most likely you're not going to be granted accreditation. But FOWODE is an accredited election observer in Uganda, and we believe it is very, very important to continue to work with them. So sometimes we organize stakeholder engagements and even invite electoral commissioners to give, you know, keynote addresses. We engage them as much as possible, but at the end of the day, they have to really work towards pleasing the appointing authority. So that's the challenge. Maybe Sarah could.
Yes, and so like Georgia said, it's the president who appoints them. So after elections, they are answerable to only one person, the president. So no one will force them out of their seats. Actually, for us, we've had electoral commissions who run for like three terms until they appoint other people. They are not on pressure in any way.
Okay, thank you. In Ethiopia, civil society is strongly working in the elections of 2005. You know, at that time, we working by supporting the opposing party, but the government immediately take action that is restriction law was in place for civil society, article proclamation number 621. So, but from 2005 till 2018, any civil society couldn't work on elections as observant or teaching civic and voters education. But after the civil society restrictions lifted in 2018, we working strongly with election board. For example, EWDNA submitting a proposal for the Ethiopian National Board. Then, after reviewing and approving, we received a certificate from Ethiopian Election Board. That certificate allowed to work by teaching civic education and voters education, and also provided a members for us observant. So currently in our 6th Ethiopian election, all civil society organizations strongly working on civic education, teaching civic education and voters education, and also provided observantes by contributing or by selecting from different human rights organizations and civil society organizations, while we are conducting even in collaboration with Ethiopian Lawyer Association as what gender-based violence looks like pre and post election. Thank you.
Thank you. Regarding the Ethiopian Electoral Board, Proclamation 1133, 2019. Let me just read. Says, National Election Board is a manner that is independent from the influence of any other body and which enables its conduct fair, trustworthy, and peaceful election. This is how the proclamation is stated, the election board. So the election board continues existing regardless of the election period of a significant ruling party. So we don't discharge them after any election, but they continue so long as the system is there.
Okay, maybe the electoral board, as Karalcha mentioned, is maybe independent, but the fact is the Prime Minister of the country nominates the electoral board member manager and all its members and approved by House of People Representative. So what we observe is mostly this commission and its members are not independent of fulfilling the need of the ruling party. That's why we have said earlier that the apathy or the confidence of the voter on this election process is a little bit minimal. And also I was thinking maybe a response from Kenyans in this regard, that I want to know how they have created this political society, because mostly we Ethiopians are not this much concerned. Maybe me and I observe are not concerned with this politics, and we don't care sometimes to go to election and also to discuss on those points. I'm observing that. So how did you just maybe create such a political society that just are really concerned? And so I want you to share us maybe this.
I think Richard has an announcement, then we continue.
Sorry, it's just a short announcement. We are very much live in YouTube, and we've been live since yesterday. So on YouTube page, just search FIDA-Kenya. Then you can click, then share the link to your friends, to your people, they'll be watching you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Now we can get response. Kenyans, you are again asked to answer.
Yes. Thank you for your observation. And in our Kenyan experience, I would like to take you down our history, the history of Kenya, and why we have become so keen in matters politics, and why it's so divisive in this country. So I'll take you back to the pre-colonial, the colonial period, and then post-colonial period. So we were colonized by the British. The British, yes. And if you look at the history of I can't say that word, that one. You see, I was not colonized. So, so if you look at our history, then with colonization, it was the white settlers who came and who occupied, leadership positions. And at that time, we had the Legislative Council. So years later, when now we started agitating for independence, that's when there was appointment of one person into the Legislative Council, and who was a man, Eliud Matthew. So 2 years after the appointment of the first African man to the Legislative Council, that's when 2 other men were appointed to join the Legislative Council. Again, women were missing. So years later, some other men joined the Legislative Council. Then there were elections. In these elections, women did not participate. Again, the men took the positions. Later on, now when we were coming up with the independence constitution, one woman got an opportunity to go to Lancaster House in London. And so there were conversations about, how do we craft a constitution, our independence constitution, our post-colonialism. And in that space, there were about 70 African men who went to Lancaster House, and there was only one woman who got an opportunity to sit there with the 70. And when she was there, she was not afforded space to speak. She was only relegated to provide a written memorandum on behalf of all the Kenyan African women. Only one woman went to participated in that platform, and even then, she was not allowed to speak. She only gave her input in form of a written document, which was a memorandum. Now, when they came back to Kenya, and we got an independence, the independence constitution did not include the participation of women. So it was largely patriarchal. So then, now there was the agitation for women participation in elections, because now the men had positioned themselves strategically to wield power, or to take over power. So then, with the exclusion of women, women started looking for alternative ways, because later on, when we had a woman parliamentarian who proposed what now we are saying the gender quota, this did not go down well with the legislators then, and it was never passed. But women did not give up. They continued to agitate. And then there was a formation of an institution called the Maendeleo ya Wanawake, like a grouping for women. Maendeleo ya Wanawake, they're not in the room. But remember, even FIDA, back then, we were established in 1985. But Maendeleo back then was the organization or the movement that brought together women. However, the Maendeleo ya Wanawake was a creation of, let me say, the colonial government, because it was formed for purposes of, helping African women be able to manage their families, domestic roles, really. And because they were able to mobilize, and because they were getting funding from the colonial state then, at that point we had a one-party rule. So we have the independence constitution, and then we got to a point where the country only allowed one party, and the ruling party was KANU. So KANU noticed that this women move, this organization was attracting, participation, attracting crowds, and there were a lot of women involved in that movement. So KANU, also appreciating that this movement was also receiving funding from the colonial state, so started interfering with this Maendeleo ya Wanawake. So now, remember, this is an outfit for women, and you have the ruling party, you have the president, and all the men. They've now taken interest in this outfit. And now, by taking interest in this outfit, they started pitting the women against each other. And now it became a political outfit, rather than, because initially it was apolitical, then it became a political outfit. And then now we started seeing, the women leaders like Wangari Maathai, who took over leadership. And then there was a disagreement between Wangari Maathai and the president then of, a building that was supposed to be constructed in one of our parks. And then the women went against each other. And that was, so the men pitted the women against each other. So as the women were fighting, the politicians used that to say, you know what, these women cannot even, lead us, because of, their little minds cannot allow them to engage properly because they are emotional. So then that particular outfit lost its luster. As it was losing its luster, the country was becoming woke, if I can use that word. The country was becoming woke, and now people were agitating for now multi-party democracy, to have more parties participate in governance processes. So again, issues with the ruling party. Are people, getting tired of the 24 years rule, and people saying enough is enough. Remember, the Independence Constitution also at some point was being amended whimsically, political whims, to fit certain political agendas. So the Independence Constitution was amended severally to a point where now the fundamental rights no longer existed. It allowed for discrimination and all that. So people got tired of, those amendments to the Constitution. They got tired of the political rule, the 24 years rule, and people said, you know what, we are going to come together and we are going to topple. Can I use the word topple? We are going to demand for change. And that is when all the men, the women, different tribes, all of us came together and said, we want change. And that is what led now to multi-party politics in Kenya. And then it also fed into the new constitutional dispensation. We got a new constitution because of that agitation, looking at our history. So you have the history, the women's history, but you also have the political history, and you also have the clamor for a new constitutional dispensation. So now with the new constitutional dispensation, we imagined that the 2010 constitution was going to perform magic. But again, as we were busy saying we have the best constitution in the world, we also realized that along the way we lost it somewhere, and we are not implementing some of the ideals or guarantees that we have in the constitution. So that is why you see Kenyans are still interested, are still participating in this space. But then again, there's also historical injustices in Kenya that make certain quarters continue to push. And one of the quarters is the women, because in as much as we have realized some of the gains, we're also noticing that some of these gains are being clawed back. So the women continue to push. The marginalized, special interest groups continue to push because their rights are still not being realized. Also, because we are a patriarchal society, there are still certain impediments that stand in the way in the full realization of our constitution. And then, of course, historical injustices impacting on our different communities. That is what keeps us, gives us that push to continue engaging with the process. I hope that history lesson was beneficial.
Thank you very much. I'm sure it was beneficial. I can see people nodding. So, any other contribution in terms of from the morning discussion or yesterday's coming all the way to our electoral bodies in our separate countries? As you can see from what we've had, our counterparts in Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia have spoken, the electoral bodies have a key role to play to ensure a free, fair election, but most importantly to ensure persons with disability, their rights are also catered for, as well as to ensure women participation in political activities are also safeguarded, especially women who are vying and also women who are voters. So we've also seen that electoral bodies have a role to play with stakeholders to constantly engage. And what is also the role of the stakeholders? Because I think most people don't know that they have a role to play. We concentrate more on the electoral body and we forget what can we individually from our different organizations do to become that part and parcel of the change that is needed. How are we shaping our questions, our policies, so that we can also have a consultative meeting with the electoral bodies? Because like I said, electoral bodies have robust roles and responsibilities, but whether the same is achieved is a bit different. And so it calls upon all of us as citizens in this African context to actually follow up. I don't know if there are questions. Then if there are none, then I will open for plenary. You're free to ask any question on anything we tackled yesterday and up to now. So it's open. There was a question I think he had asked during break. I think he can now bring it up for others to respond. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yesterday we were discussing about the number of people or voters registered. And then when the election takes place, majority of the vote goes to the upper nominees or candidates, like the presidential candidates. Actually, she gave an experience that if 9 million people are registered, maybe about 6 million vote goes to the presidential area, and only left with 3 million, which is very minimum, and also limits the number of women participants. So how can we navigate or make equalize that votes are shared among all the positions so that we can have more candidates of women and also the candidates we want at the proper place, is my question, if I addressed it correctly. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone who wants to attempt to answer? So perhaps for me, what I'll say, I had drawn this diagram. Free and fair elections start from the point of registration of voters. So the registration process, this is where we start. And as women and persons with disability, here is where we fail, because we don't mobilize enough to ensure we have enough people registered as voters. The second phase, of course, is the part that you verify whether you're a registered voter or not, because after the process, you have to confirm whether you're on the list of registered voters. Again, we still fail in this and this. So already, it's a red flag. We come down to the voting day. This is another red flag, because sometimes you might find there are 3 scenarios. You come, register as a voter, you verify you're a registered voter, and you actually vote. That's good. Or the second option, you don't register as a voter, definitely you can't be verified as a voter, and definitely you can't vote. That's again a lost vote. Or the third, you come and find you're registered, but when you come to verify you're not there, therefore you don't vote. And even the fourth situation, you're a registered voter, you confirmed, you're verified, but you don't vote. That's what now we call the apathy. Then of course the last day is now at the election day, where you're supposed to vote. So once once you vote, the election material day you vote, and you go home. So this is an entire process, but most people concentrate here and forget this is like a cycle, it's a build-up. So that also brought about the fact that you find people now, once they finish this cycle, they disappear. If you win the seat, good for you, you go to parliament. If you lose, that's the end of you. You close that chapter until the next cycle. So this is a whole cycle for me. So coming to your question, I also mentioned that most countries had challenges in urban areas in terms of voting times and the election process. So most people, in my opinion, it's just the awareness of what these seats entail. You will share with us the experience in Ethiopia, but in Kenya, the seats are, of course, the presidential, and then which is one ticket with the running mate. We used to call a vice president, now it's a running mate. This is one ticket. Then the second is normally the governor's seat, the senator's seat. The fourth one is the area MP. The fifth is the women rep. And then the sixth is the ward representative, what we call the MCA. So Uganda and Ethiopia, you will share with us. So out of these 6 seats, in Kenya, I think the voter apathy was mostly from the urban dwellers, the middle class, and the youth. So these youth and urban people don't really care. For the old, who played a crucial role in the transformative agenda in this country and have actually gone through the struggle, woke up and decided up here. So most people, what my suggestion would be is voter education, explaining to the voter, what does it mean to elect someone as a governor? Should a governor be a politician? That's what the question I always ask people. Or should he be more of a managerial person because he runs a county, he runs resources? So what are the duties and responsibilities of a governor? And who should we elect as a governor? What are the responsibilities of Senate, being the oversight? What are the responsibilities of the MP, who is in charge of your constituency development fund? What is the work of the woman rep, which is now one of the seats that we call the quota seats? Then what is the function of the MCA? Unless a voter understands, like in the Kenyan context, the importance of all these seats and what each seat should do, then the only thing in a voter's mind is that it is the president who should do everything. So they come in to decide who will be the president. In some cases, those who are a bit exposed just concentrate on the top 2. Who is my governor in my county and who is my president? The assumption to most is that the president, especially in the interior, is that the president is the one who should do development up to the ward level. They forget that it is the area MCA who should actually concentrate on the ward. The president is there, yes, but there's a person who is in charge of the ward development. So for me, the option is for us to avoid people just coming in to tick the presidential vote or one seat and then going home, is actually to create awareness on what these seats entail and who should you go to address a certain issue. There are functions that are in Kenyan system that are devolved, that the governor can handle. You don't have to run to the presidency. There is a whole office here of the county government. So if, in my opinion, if voters are aware of the seats, the importance of each seat, then they'll be able to make a decision. But if the voter doesn't know, then it is what is on the top. Who is my president? That's all that they care about. So they really don't think that a governor has any impact in their life, leave alone an MP or an MCA or even the senator. So they really don't care. So in my opinion, I'm curious to hear how the elective seats are in Uganda and Ethiopia, but in my opinion, it is just the voter awareness. Let's do a campaign for them to know what seat stands for what and what the duties and functions of that office entails. I would give a minute or two to Sarah in Uganda, maybe to explain how theirs work, and then Ethiopia, my sister. I'm putting you on the spot a lot. But anyone can volunteer from Ethiopia.
Okay, thank you so much. For us, we start from the presidential seat. And from the presidential seat, we go to the members of parliament. And then from the members of parliament, we go to the district chairpersons. So with the members of parliament, that is inclusive of the direct seat and the women's seats. And then we go to the chairpersons. These chairpersons, for you, you call governors, I think. President, members of parliament, direct and affirmative seats. Yes. And then we go to the district chairpersons. I think here that they are the governors. And then we go to the sub-county councillors. Yes. Yeah, those are that. Actually, for them, importance is attached to the president and the MPs. For them, that's what they think. And after the presidential elections, now the voter turn up drops down, especially if their presidential or preferred president has been won. Yeah.
Thank you, Ethiopia. How are your seats?
Okay, thank you. The President, the Prime Minister, the Ministers, House of Representatives.
Sorry, are the ministers also voted for? I'm looking at the voting. Who are voted for in Ethiopia?
Okay, from the Parliament.
So it is the...
You know, the President is assigned by the Prime Minister, but the Prime Minister was voted by the parliamentarians. Then the Prime Minister provided the selected the ministers.
So now I wanted the hierarchy on the ones who are elected.
Yes. Yes. What?
I'm saying the question is those who are elected by the citizens.
No. You know, Ethiopia is from different ethnicity. The contributions of the parliamentarians is from different ethnicity. Then the division of the power, the authority is divided among different ethnicity. It depends on the population size. For example, Oromia is the highest, Amhara, then the other ethnicity. But the president is the highest body of the country. Then the prime minister, the parliament, the House of Federation, city council, and regional president. City council, yeah.
So you can see the structure is more the same. So people, which seat is voted for the most, or they vote for all the seats?
The Prime Minister.
Okay.
You know, the Addis Ababa Mir provided her city council, her councillor. Then the Prime Minister also provided asking approval from his parliament for the cabinet.
Okay.
Most of the cabinet is ministers.
Thank you.
And he assigned the regional president. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. So any other contribution, question or comment? Then with that said, I will invite Maureen. We had a pending matter for a few minutes before we break for lunch. So I'll hand over the mic to her to complete for the mid-morning session. Thank you.
Thank you, Asha. So okay, so how do we incorporate all of what we've discussed into? I'm gonna talk about funding, but I'll talk about it in the context of WROs. If you want other funding advice which is outside my remit as a Womankind employee, please come in. I've been in the system for a long time, so the tips and tricks I'm aware. Within the context of WROs, how do you do this work? Because WROs is a restricted budget. WROs is a restricted budget. You've already designed all your activities, and you're probably asking yourself, okay, why didn't we do this at proposal stage then? This would have made more sense if we had done it at proposal stage. And yes, it would have. That's another thing I can talk to people individually about. However, these activities such as voter education, so we spoke a lot about voter education and civic education. These can actually be added to the activities that you have. Because while your activities are already constructed, you have leeway within your activities. So I'm going to talk about UDNA first and just highlight a few activities in which you can talk about voter education. So you work a lot with university students with the Yellow Movement and the Addis Ababa University and Hausa University. I hope I'm pronouncing all of them right. Okay. So as you work with this population, because they are a young population, they're a university population, these are people that you can teach about, you can give them voter education. You can tailor-make voter education towards them. You can talk to and you can also, it's an age that you can influence about inclusion. You can also start making them ask about inclusion, query inclusion, think about inclusion. And then you also you work with women's rights organizations. So women's rights organizations, so UDNA, you work with other mainstream women's rights organizations. They're potentially working on voter education, political participation in peace processes. It's really important as you work with them, you also educate them on the needs of women with disabilities, but also I think for women with disabilities, they're in a hard position because women with disabilities also need to be in the mainstream women's movement. They also need to be there because sometimes the mainstream women's movements are just there, but they mention women, but they don't really mean women with disability. They just mean women in general, and they don't really make provisions for that. It's starting to change, but it's a point where you can start doing voter education. Even just a simple question of asking people, how many of you are registered to vote? Like the people who you have coffee sessions with, do you ever ask them how many of you are registered to vote? Do you know if they're registered to vote? Do you know if they're interested in voting? Do you know what their blockers are with regards to voting and political participation? And is that then something you can take on to your higher advocacy things? I'll move on to Siiqqee. So I was just giving UDNA a little time, so now I'll move on to Siiqqee. So Siiqqee, your numbers are big. When I read your reports, your numbers are big. You organize 4,000 young women in peer-to-peer discussions in factory areas. And I think peer-to-peer groups are great for voter education. They're also, you can do it. I saw you shaking your head, but you can teach them. Like voter education is something, not everybody has access to knowledge. That's the truth. Not everybody has access to knowledge. And you can't be interested in something that you don't know. And the truth is, maybe I'll talk a bit about the Kenya situation in reference to making sure that women know about voting. Every single pro-woman legislation in Kenya has been brought by a woman in leadership. There is no man in Kenya who has brought a pro-woman legislation. Zero, none. So if we're depending on men to bring pro-women legislation, we're in a bad place. So it's important that we tell women, look, it's actually your sisters that are here campaigning for your rights. If you look at the Sexual Offences Act, that was raised by a woman, a reproductive health bill, which has been combated since, still brought forward by a woman. Two-third gender rule, this was done by women's rights organizations. Pro-women legislation is led by women. The first thing to do is let them know the advantages of voting for women. Let them know so that you can see, are you interested, are you not? But whether or not you're interested, these are the ways you can engage. Because now with knowledge will come greater interest and also an avenue to ask people. So you reach at least 4,000 young women who are factory workers and IDPs. So it's a great place to start doing some of this voter education, civic education, registration even, talking to them about the barriers. And then for mentorship, I know Uganda, you're doing a lot of mentorship. You work with a lot of women leaders, but you also work in communities, especially with financing on SGBV. Is that a place you talk to women about their rights, about the importance of voting for women, about the importance of registration? It also forms an avenue. And I know, and for Uganda, I maybe know the funding context better, Ethiopia not so much. You have an election in 2026, so you're probably thinking about fundraising already. I'm sure, without a doubt, you're thinking of fundraising for activities related to empowerment of women during elections. So it's also something to think about there. For FIDA, I don't know, you're already doing the work. Is there anything I can tell you to do? But I mean, for you guys, you conducted a gender audit, so you know what went wrong in the election with regards to women voting. Put some money towards like fixing what you went wrong. FIDA is also one of the most proactive organizations on Awesome, asking for changes all the time. But we welcome that. We actually welcome that, because the funding that you have has to be fit for purpose. If you need to make changes to your plans to make, of course, in line with our key priority areas, it's good to ask. So things that FIDA has asked for example, I'll give examples of FIDA because they've been the most proactive with asking. They wanted to do some work around FGM. There was an emergency situation that arose, so they asked if they can change some activities around so that they can talk to women leaders about the FGM situation, and that's something that, of course, we agreed. They also were going to do a Women Leadership Award. They've realized that they'd rather train the newly incoming parliamentarians than use that money to give an award. That's also something that we can change, because it has to be strategic, has to be valuable, has to be fit for purpose, even on a long-term program. All of you engage with your community. You have community engagement under our second pillar of society. Do you do voter education there? Do you do voter education? Because you're meeting lots of members of the society. Think about adding some voter education and some civic education to your activities, especially for the ones who are having upcoming elections in 2026. Because at least you want people, even if people don't do anything with the knowledge immediately, they are going to do something with the knowledge eventually, and it's building. Like, political participation is something that builds. Political interest is something that builds. It's not something Like, when I think about my journey, I would say when I was 18, I wasn't interested in politics, but I have since become, I will be a politician. I will be running at some point in my life. And then for WCC, I think you have a lot of engagement in the space already. So you're already talking to PWDs. WCC, for those who don't know, were very instrumental in the women with disabilities who participated in our last election. I hope you're continuing to work with those same women so that in the next 5-year cycle, they will be ready. So I think they can discuss from that point. I think they have many, many examples. They also did a lot of groundwork in discovering why women with disabilities don't vote, in fact, they're a great example, why they don't vote. They then gave them education, but they then also worked with the IBC on creating accessible spaces. Did it work the first time? Not very well. Not very well at all, but they're not going to stop. The thing it's a building journey. So now they know all the things that went wrong, and they can fix it as they go along, even on their awesome journey. And as for Ethiopian Uganda, as you start to raise money for 2026, negotiate with your donors. Do programs that make sense. Think about, when you see calls for proposals, is the first thing to do just to create a proposal that exactly fits the donor criteria, but sometimes it doesn't make sense. Think about, does this make sense? Negotiate with your donor, especially if they've given you money before. You have avenues, you have connections, negotiate with them. Explain why some things make sense and why some things don't make sense. And then you can collaborate with your sisters, FIDA. They're very good at, working in the gray lines. I'd say working in the gray lines. So complying, but kind of like, also they've been informed by women politicians, we can't come to your meetings because what we need is branding money. So if that's what you're hearing in Uganda, ask FIDA, how did they work around those donor constraints? So I think there's lessons to be learned, and Ethiopia as well. The programs have to make sense to you, and they have to make sense to you before they make sense to the donor. Negotiate hard. And then I also want to say another bit of advice for the people who are raising money for electoral and related activities. Look at your core costs, because you are doing the hard work. So you can't have one program person and you're trying to be in how many locations, Sarah? No, for Awesome, let's give an example of Awesome. You're in 2 districts. How many program people do you have? And then how many people are you trying to reach? Exactly. So you have to really think about the work you're doing and the number of people it takes to do that work, and budget realistically. It's better to budget realistically and be asked to cut than to budget not realistically and you will be asked to cut anyway. That's where the negotiation starts. So it's really good to think about those factors as you negotiate. Of course, Awesome now we're on a closed budget, but for more tips and tricks, I am available. All right. And that's all from me. I will see. Okay, I don't think we should be, if you have any questions for me now, I can take some questions. I can take 1 or 2 questions. A reflection.
It's good. The first question you asked is, why is this program at this time? You said, it was my question also. I said, why? Election now and then, leadership, women in politics. At Siiqqee, what we were doing from the beginning is supporting women to be leaders at all levels, not political leaders, but leaders just to bring women at the front. We haven't think about political or election processes. We have no experience at that time, and even the 2021 election time was not a convenient time in our country. So for the coming, yes, we have to make ourselves ready for 2026. We will do that. But how can we raise this fund? From where we get this fund? At what point we request for fund? Just from now on, or I don't know. But this is a situation with Siqqee's case. Of course, we have constituencies in AWESOME program at the same time with other projects also. There is a platform where we can address women for this election, for voting, for whatever. So now I realized that this is an important issue for the future, for future action. Thank you.
Thanks, Zati. And I think that's really good to know. Like, I think you said the context of Ethiopia has been slightly different from the context of Kenya and Uganda. But also putting women in leadership, not just in politics, is also important. Like women in leadership all around, whether it's in business, whether it is in CSOs, NGOs, whether it is women in leadership positions is needed for representation. We can't be half the population, but we only occupy 1% or 2% of leadership. So even in the factories that Siiqqee works in, equally important to have women in leadership representation. And then as regards to where do we look for funding, I think usually we look at funding cycles, so different donors have different funding cycles, different donors have different funding interests, so it's to do like usually what people do is a donor mapping to find out which donors are interested in our country, what are they interested in, how do we start talking to them, how do we negotiate with them, how do we open relationships. All right. Okay, I'm going to release everybody for lunch. Everybody's looking a bit dull.
Yeah, just a point, because we have an activity regarding election at the end of the AWESOME project period. So I remember because we were there from the concept paper development. So at that time we expected that the election will be early 2021. No, early 2020. So during the concept paper development in February 2020, we had an activity lobbying and advocacy for mobilizing women for election. But when the actual budget was on modification, because we cannot make during the first year, so we just took it out and then put it the budget for the fifth year, so that we campaign or we prepare women for election and mobilizing women for election in the 2026. So we have an activity. So the reason, the point you raised, even awareing our factory workers, 4,000 factory workers, we have also male engagement, 15,000 male engagement sessions. So we can also discuss, put the element of election and awareness in those discussions. So we can address 15,000 community members and also as well as larger community women groups in our activities. So in addition, maybe for the campaign, this is just for the awareness raising within our reach, within our targets. But to do it more and mobilize more women, I think we will go for the budget modification, articulating what activities we are going to engage in. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Galalcha, and I think that's really important. Also, you can only do what you can do. So I know Ethiopia's population is one of the biggest in Africa. So I think every CSO and every NGO will hold its space. Please go. Okay. I will release you all for lunch. Have a good lunch. I think lunch is on the... Christabella, please help me. Where's lunch? Is it on the second floor? It's on the first floor. It's on the first floor. All right. Oh, sorry? Where we were yesterday.